The park had changed little in the 40 years Franklin Miles had been visiting it. The same oak trees, now thicker around the middle, much like the people who sat beneath them, provided shade from the morning sun. The same winding path circled the small lake where ducks gathered in greater numbers each year, perhaps sensing this was one of the few places in the city where they would be welcomed rather than displaced. Franklin was as much a fixture in Westlake Park as the bronze statue of the town founder near the entrance. Every morning, rain or shine, the 67-year-old former Marine made his appearance at precisely 0700 hours, his posture still military straight, despite the oak cane he'd begun using after his knee surgery 3 years ago. The regulars, dog walkers, joggers, the elderly chess players who claimed the concrete tables near the eastern gate, they all knew Franklin. Not from conversation. He rarely spoke more than a polite, "Good morning." They knew him by his presence, by the clockwork reliability of his movements, by the careful way he observed his surroundings without appearing to stare. Most of all, they knew him by what Mrs. Abernathy, the retired librarian who fed the ducks each morning, called his contained energy. At first glance, Franklin might appear to be just another senior citizen taking his constitutional. But there was something in the way he moved, deliberate, balanced, aware, that suggested the oak cane was a choice rather than a necessity. "That man," Mrs. Abernathy once told her friend over their Thursday bridge game, "carries himself like he's still 20 years old inside, like he's just waiting for something to happen." Something did happen on a Tuesday in early autumn when the maple trees were beginning to hint at their coming transformation. Franklin was halfway through his second lap around the park when he noticed them, 3 young men lounging on a bench near the playground. This was unusual. Weekday mornings in the park belonged to the older crowd and young mothers with preschool children. These boys were clearly of an age where they should have been in school or at work. The tallest one, wearing a black hoodie despite the warm morning, was smoking directly beneath a "no smoking" sign. His companions, one heavy-set with a patchy attempt at a beard, the other wiry with elaborate tattoos crawling up his neck, were passing something in a paper bag between them that Franklin doubted was soda. Franklin didn't alter his pace or path. Years in the Marines had taught him the value of maintaining course while assessing a situation. As he drew nearer, fragments of their conversation drifted to him, boasts about some confrontation, crude remarks about a girl they knew, complaints about someone's disrespect. Any other morning, Walker might have diverted their path to avoid passing directly in front of the trio. Franklin did not. He continued his measured stride, eyes forward but awareness expanded, a habit that had saved his life more than once, in places far from this peaceful park. He was nearly past them when the tall one flicked his cigarette, sending it arcing to land a few inches from Franklin's shoe. "What are you looking at, old man?" the boy called, voice pitched to carry. Franklin paused, turning slowly to face them. He said nothing. The question was a trap, of course. Franklin recognized it as the opening move in a game these boys had likely played many times, a game where any response would be twisted into justification for escalation. "You deaf or something?" the tattooed one added, leaning forward. "Jaden asked you a question." Franklin looked each of them in the eye, one by one, his gaze steady and evaluating. Then, with deliberate care, he used the tip of his cane to nudge the still-smoking cigarette butt toward the trash can a few feet away. "You should pick that up," Franklin said, his voice quiet but carrying the unmistakable tone of command. "There are children who play here." The tall one, Jaden, snorted, nudging his heavy-set friend. "You hearing this? Grandpa thinks he's running the show." "Listen, old-timer," the heavy-set one said, standing up. He was shorter than Franklin by several inches, but outweighed him by at least 50 pounds. "This is our bench now, our part of the park. You can take your little walk somewhere else." Franklin's expression didn't change. "This park belongs to everyone, but respect belongs to those who earn it." He looked pointedly at the cigarette butt. "That wasn't respectful." "Oh, yeah?" Jaden stood now, too, towering over Franklin by at least 3 inches. "What are you gonna do about it, old school? Call the cops? Tell our mommies?" Franklin simply looked at him for a long moment. Then he spoke, his voice even lower than before, forcing the boys to lean in slightly to hear him. "Young men, go about your business, and let me go about mine. You don't want trouble with me." Something in his tone made the tattooed one hesitate, but Jaden just laughed. "Did you hear that? Grandpa thinks he's scary." He stepped closer to Franklin, invading his personal space. "Listen, old man, we don't take orders from fossils. Why don't you hobble back to the retirement home before you break a hip?" Franklin didn't back away. He didn't raise his voice. He simply said, "I'm only going to say this once more. Walk away. I am not your enemy unless you make me one." For a heartbeat, there was silence. Then Jaden laughed again, turning to his friends. "Can you believe this guy?" While his head was turned, Franklin took one smooth step backward, creating distance. When Jaden looked back, something had changed in the old man's posture, a subtle shift that the boy couldn't identify, but which made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. But pride is a powerful force in young men trying to impress their peers. Instead of heeding the warning signals, Jaden doubled down. "You know what? I don't like your attitude, old man." He flicked another cigarette directly at Franklin's chest. "What are you gonna do about that?" Franklin caught the cigarette in midair, crushed it in his palm, and deposited it in his pocket, all in one fluid motion that seemed impossibly fast for a man his age. "Nothing today," he said quietly, "but remember my face. Remember I warned you." With that, he turned and continued his walk, his pace unchanged, his breathing calm. Behind him he could hear the boys laughing, their voices carrying across the morning air as they mocked his threat. Franklin didn't look back. He completed his usual 3 laps, nodded to Mrs. Abernathy as he passed the duck pond, and walked home to the small bungalow where he had lived alone since his wife passed 5 years earlier. That evening, he cleaned and oiled his cane, a gift from his former platoon when he retired, and went to bed at his usual time of 2200 hours. The boys were waiting for him the next morning. Franklin saw them from 50 yards away, lounging on the same bench. This time, they had brought a portable speaker that was blasting music with lyrics that would have made even his old drill sergeant blush. 2 mothers with strollers had already diverted their morning walks to avoid passing near them. Franklin sighed quietly. He had hoped his warning would be sufficient. Experience had taught him that most confrontations could be avoided if one side was willing to recognize the warning signs. But these boys were either too young or too foolish to read what was in front of them. He maintained his course, walking directly toward them. "Look who's back!" Jaden called out when Franklin was still 20 paces away. "Old-timer couldn't stay away from us." Franklin stopped in front of them, his posture relaxed but balanced, his cane planted firmly beside his right foot. "The volume of your music is disturbing others," he said calmly, "and you're still littering." He nodded toward the fresh cigarette butts scattered around the bench. "Oh, yeah," the heavy-set one stood up, emboldened by their numerical advantage. "What's with the military stick up your ass, man? This ain't the Army." "Marines," Franklin corrected mildly, "and courtesy isn't exclusive to the military. It's what separates men from boys." The tattooed one snickered. "Courtesy? What is this, the 1950s? Wake up, Gramps. Nobody cares about that shit anymore." Franklin studied them, seeing beyond their posturing to the insecurity beneath. In another time, these might have been the kind of young men he'd have taken under his wing, channeled their energy into something productive. He had done that many times over his 30 years of service, turned angry boys into disciplined men. But these three didn't want guidance, at least not today. "I'm going to give you the same warning as yesterday," Franklin said. "Show some respect for this public space and the people in it, or there will be consequences." Jaden stood up, stepping so close that Franklin could smell cigarettes and cheap beer on his breath. "Consequences? Like what? You and what army, old man?" Franklin didn't flinch or step back. "I don't need an army." "You've got a cane," Jaden said, reaching out to tap it with his finger. "You know what that tells me? That tells me you're broken down, used up." "The cane is for my convenience," Franklin replied, "not necessity." "Prove it," challenged the tattooed one, joining his friend. "Drop the stick. Let's see what you got." Franklin looked at them calmly. "I don't have to prove anything to you, but I am asking you one last time to moderate your behavior, lower the music, clean up your mess, let people enjoy their morning." For a moment, something flickered in Jaden's eyes, perhaps a glimmer of doubt, a fleeting recognition that they might be poking a bear they couldn't handle. But then the heavy-set one shoved Franklin's shoulder. "Get lost, dinosaur, before you get hurt."
Franklin absorbed the shove without moving his feet, like a tree bending slightly in the wind before returning to position. His voice, when he spoke, was softer than before, which somehow made it more unsettling.
"Tomorrow, I'll complete my walk as usual. If you're here to cause trouble again, I won't be issuing any more warnings. Consider that carefully." He resumed his walk, ignoring the taunts and laughter that followed him. As he passed the duck pond, Mrs. Abernathy gave him a concerned look. "Are those hooligans bothering you, Mr. Miles?" she asked. "Nothing to worry about," Franklin assured her. "Just young men with more energy than sense." But as he continued home, his mind was troubled. Violence had never been his first choice, not even in war, especially not in a peaceful park in his hometown. Yet some lessons could only be taught through direct experience. He hoped it wouldn't come to that. That night, Franklin did something he hadn't done in months. He went down to his basement and unwrapped the heavy punching bag that hung in the corner. For 40 minutes, he worked through drills that had been ingrained in his muscle memory through decades of practice. His body protested at first, the knee especially, but soon warmed to the familiar movements. When he finished, breathing heavily but evenly, he knew he was still capable if pushed. Not as fast as in his prime, perhaps, but more than adequate for what might come. He wrapped his hands carefully afterward, applying arnica gel to his knuckles. Violence was a young man's game, but experience often trumped youth. He had learned that lesson in places far more dangerous than Westlake Park. Franklin slept soundly that night, at peace with what tomorrow might bring. They were waiting for him, as he'd expected. Not just waiting, but prepared. The three boys had positioned themselves along the path rather than on the bench, creating a gauntlet of sorts that Franklin would have to pass through. Jaden stood in the center of the path, his hands in the pocket of his hoodie, a smirk on his face. His two friends flanked the path on either side. Franklin noted that the park was unusually empty this morning. No chess players at their tables, no Mrs. Abernathy at the pond. Whether by coincidence or design, there were few witnesses. Only a young woman some distance away, focused on her phone as she sat on a bench. "Morning, Grandpa," Jaden called out as Franklin approached. "We were just talking about you." Franklin stopped a few paces away, assessing the situation. The positioning was deliberate, classic intimidation tactic, designed to make him feel surrounded and vulnerable. The tattooed one was bouncing slightly on the balls of his feet, eager for action. The heavy-set one was trying to appear casual, but his right hand kept twitching toward his back pocket. "Last chance," Franklin said simply. "Step aside, and let's all enjoy our morning in peace." Jaden's smirk widened. "Or what? You'll beat us all up with your little stick?" He mimicked an old man swinging a cane, drawing laughter from his friends. Franklin sighed. He carefully placed his cane against a nearby tree, then removed his light jacket, folding it neatly and placing it on a bench. Beneath it, he wore a simple gray T-shirt that revealed arms corded with lean muscle. Not the bulging biceps of a gym enthusiast, but the functional strength of a man who had kept himself ready his entire life. "I've warned you twice," Franklin said, rolling his shoulders slightly. "I won't warn you again." "Oh, Grandpa's stripping down," the tattooed one taunted. "I'm so scared." Franklin didn't respond to the taunt. He simply stood, waiting. His hands relaxed at his sides, his weight balanced evenly on both feet despite the mild protest from his right knee. It was the heavy-set one who moved first, rushing forward with more speed than Franklin would have credited him with, swinging a meaty fist toward Franklin's face. Franklin wasn't there when the punch arrived. With a subtle shift of weight and a tilt of his upper body, he let the punch sail past his ear. Then, using the boy's own momentum, he guided him forward with the lightest touch on his elbow, sending him stumbling off balance. Before the heavy-set boy could recover, Franklin delivered a precise strike to the back of his knee, not hard enough to cause damage, but perfectly placed to collapse the leg. The boy went down with a surprised grunt. The tattooed one was already in motion, coming at Franklin from the side with a wild haymaker. Franklin stepped inside the punch, blocked it with his forearm, and delivered two rapid strikes, one to the solar plexus that knocked the wind from the boy's lungs, another to the pressure point where neck meets shoulder, sending a shock of nerve pain down his arm. The tattooed boy dropped to his knees, gasping for breath, his arm temporarily useless. All of this had happened in less than 6 seconds. Jaden stood frozen, his confident smirk replaced by wide-eyed shock. Then his face contorted with rage, and he reached into his pocket, pulling out brass knuckles that glinted in the morning sunlight. "You're dead, old man," he snarled, advancing cautiously now. Franklin's expression hadn't changed during the entire encounter. He simply adjusted his stance slightly, hands still open rather than fisted, watching Jaden's approach with the calm assessment of a man who had faced far worse than an angry boy with a weapon he barely knew how to use. Jaden lunged forward, swinging the brass knuckles in a vicious arc aimed at Franklin's temple. A potentially lethal blow if it connected. But Franklin moved with the fluid grace of decades of training, ducking under the swing while simultaneously driving his palm upward into Jaden's extended elbow. There was an audible pop as the joint hyperextended, not broken, but painfully stressed beyond its normal range of motion. The brass knuckles fell from suddenly nerveless fingers as Jaden howled in pain. Franklin didn't pause. He swept Jaden's legs from under him with a textbook move, controlling his fall to minimize injury, while still ensuring he landed hard enough to knock the wind out of him. As Jaden hit the ground, Franklin smoothly transitioned to pin him, one knee pressing just firmly enough on the boy's chest to restrict his breathing without causing damage, one hand securing his good arm. Franklin leaned down, his face inches from Jaden's, and spoke in a voice too quiet for the others to hear. "I could have killed all 3 of you in under 30 seconds, he said matter-of-factly. "I chose not to. Remember that the next time you mistake kindness for weakness or age for inability." He stood up in one smooth motion, leaving Jaden gasping on the ground. The entire confrontation had lasted less than 15 seconds. Franklin retrieved his jacket and cane, then looked at each of the boys in turn as they struggled to recover. "The lesson isn't that I'm stronger or more skilled," he told them. "The lesson is that you never really know who you're dealing with until it's too late. Show respect until someone proves they don't deserve it, not the other way around." He turned to walk away, then paused, looking back over his shoulder. "And clean up your cigarette butts before you leave." As Franklin resumed his morning walk, he noticed the young woman who had been sitting on the distant bench was now standing, her phone held up. She had recorded the entire incident. Franklin nodded politely to her as he passed. "Good morning." That was amazing," she said. "Are you okay? Should I call the police?" "No need," Franklin replied. "Just some young men learning a valuable lesson about respect." He continued his usual route, completing all 3 laps despite the slight tremor in his hands, the aftermath of adrenaline that even decades of experience couldn't completely eliminate. His knee throbbed, but it was a familiar pain, an old companion rather than a concern. Mrs. Abernathy appeared at the duck pond halfway through his second lap, later than usual. "Everything all right this morning, Mr. Miles?" she asked. "I saw those troublemakers heading out of the park looking rather worse for wear." "Just a misunderstanding that's been cleared up," Franklin assured her. I think we'll have a peaceful park again tomorrow. By evening, the video had gone viral. Franklin's neighbor, a retired high school teacher named Walter, was the one who showed it to him, coming over with his iPad in hand and an expression of astonishment on his face. Franklin, have you seen this? It's you! All over the internet! Franklin watched the video with a frown. The angle was good, capturing the entire encounter clearly enough to show that he had acted in self-defense and used minimal force. The title read, Ex-Marine Schools Park Bullies in 15 Seconds Flat. How do they know I was a Marine? He asked. Walter laughed. It's in the comments. Someone recognized you from the Veterans Day ceremony last year. They've got your whole history in there. 30 years of service, Bronze Star recipient, hand-to-hand combat instructor. You're famous, my friend. Franklin shook his head. I don't want to be famous. But the internet had other ideas. By morning, local news vans were parked outside his modest bungalow. His phone rang continuously with calls from numbers he didn't recognize. When he stepped outside to get his newspaper, 2 reporters approached him immediately, microphones extended. Mr. Miles, can we get a statement about what happened in the park yesterday? Were you afraid when confronted by 3 younger men? Do you think your military training gave you an unfair advantage? Franklin looked at them steadily. No comment, he said, then went back inside. He didn't go to the park that morning, or the next. He waited a week, until the furor had died down, and the news cycle had moved on to fresher stories. When he finally returned to his routine, he found something had changed. People nodded to him with new respect. Parents pointed him out to their children. A group of veterans who had never spoken to him before invited him to join their coffee group. And more significantly, a police officer stopped him near the entrance. Mr. Miles, the officer said, I just wanted to say thank you. Those 3 have been causing problems all over town for months. After your encounter with them, they were picked up trying to shoplift at the mall. The video of what happened with you was brought up in family court. The judge gave them a choice: juvenile detention or military school. What did they choose? Franklin asked. The officer smiled. All 3 opted for military school. The judge said something about them developing a newfound respect for discipline. Franklin nodded, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders. Violence had never been his preferred teaching method, but sometimes it was the only language people understood. If those boys found their way to discipline and respect through this experience, perhaps something good had come of it after all. As he continued his walk, he noticed a small group of teenage boys watching him from near the duck pond. When he approached, the tallest one stepped forward somewhat nervously. Excuse me, sir? Are you Mr. Miles, the Marine from the video? Franklin nodded cautiously. We were wondering... The boy hesitated, then stood straighter. Would you maybe teach us some of those moves for self-defense? Franklin studied their faces, earnest, hopeful, respectful. No challenge or mockery in their eyes, just genuine admiration. Self-defense isn't just about physical techniques, he said finally. It's about awareness, discipline, knowing when to fight and when to walk away. Yes, sir, the boy said. That's what we want to learn. Franklin considered for a long moment. Then he nodded. Saturday mornings, here at 800. Don't be late. As he resumed his walk, Franklin reflected on the strange path life sometimes took. He had come to the park seeking solitude and routine after Maria's death, trying to fill empty days with familiar patterns. Now, unexpectedly, he had found a new purpose, passing on not just techniques, but principles, teaching a new generation the values that had shaped his life: discipline, respect, and the understanding that true strength often lies in restraint. The park was peaceful that morning, the usual chess players at their tables, Mrs. Abernathy feeding her ducks, young mothers pushing strollers through dappled sunlight. And in the midst of it all, Franklin Miles walked his usual path, his oak cane tapping gently against the pavement, keeping time with the rhythm of a life that had found meaning in an unexpected confrontation. A week later, a small package arrived at Franklin's door. Inside was a handwritten note and a brass plaque. The note read, "Mr. Miles, the park committee voted unanimously to place this on the bench near the duck pond. Thank you for reminding us all what real strength looks like." The plaque bore a simple inscription: "Power is not raised voices or clenched fists. It is knowing when not to speak and when not to strike." Franklin hung it instead on his living room wall next to his service medals and a fading photograph of his Marine platoon from 1978. A reminder that sometimes the most important battles are fought not on distant shores, but in neighborhood parks on ordinary Tuesday mornings, and that the most important victories are not those that make the news, but those that change a life's direction, whether that life belongs to an old Marine finding new purpose, or young men learning that respect is earned, not demanded. In the years that followed, many more young people would find their way to Franklin's impromptu Saturday morning classes in the park. Not all would grasp the deeper lessons he offered alongside the physical techniques, but some would. And for Franklin Miles, those few were worth all the effort. After all, he had not spent 30 years serving his country to retire into irrelevance. The uniform might be gone, but the duty remained: to protect, to serve, to teach. One quiet lesson at a time. 3 years later, Franklin sat on the bench near the duck pond, watching as his Saturday morning students practiced their forms on the grassy area nearby. His knee bothered him more these days, especially in cold weather, but he rarely showed it. "Mr. Miles?" He looked up to see a young man standing before him, dressed in the crisp uniform of a Marine private. It took Franklin a moment to recognize him beneath the regulation haircut and newfound confidence in his posture. "Jaden," he said, nodding in greeting. The young man stood at parade rest, his bearing impeccable. "I wanted to thank you, sir, before I ship out next week." "For what?" Franklin asked, though he already knew. "For knocking some sense into me." Jaden's face broke into a brief smile. "My drill instructor says I'm a natural, says I've got discipline he doesn't see in most recruits." Franklin nodded. "The hardest lessons are often the most valuable." "Yes, sir." Jaden hesitated, then extended his hand. "I just wanted you to know what you did that day. It changed my life." Franklin stood, ignoring the protest from his knee, and shook the young man's hand firmly. "No, son, you changed your life. I just provided a wake-up call." As he watched Jaden walk away, back straight, head high, Franklin felt a familiar warmth in his chest, the same feeling he'd experienced countless times during his years of service. The satisfaction of seeing potential realized, of witnessing transformation. He turned back to his students, lifting his voice to correct a stance, to encourage effort, to instill the principles that had guided his own life. And if the young ones sometimes mistook his small smile for sternness, well, they would learn in time that strength and gentleness were not opposing forces, but complementary aspects of the same disciplined spirit. In a world that increasingly valued noise over substance and confrontation over courtesy, Franklin Miles remained what he had always been, a quiet force, an unmovable object, a reminder that true power never needed to announce itself. It simply was. And when it spoke, people listened, even if sometimes they had to learn that lesson the hard way.